Okay, continuing on, more ready-mades. This one is Picasso's ready-made. It is the bull's head that it's been made out of a bicycle seat and bicycle helmet. And he would often do little images of bulls. He was Spanish, and what was important to him were the bull fighting in Spain. Freud. All right, he's going to influence artists. Some try to portray the inner workings of the mind, so they are called surrealists. So we have Salvador Dali over here. We have Rene Magritte, and any image again with these guys with the hats and the apples, and Joan Miro. So Dali, Magritte, Miro, surrealists. Germany after World War I, we have the Bauhaus. They establish standards for architecture and design. They attempt to reconcile mass production with aesthetics. So things are being produced over and over and over, but that still doesn't have to mean it can have no artistic appeal. And that form should follow function. That even though it's very utilitarian, it can still look good. But their idea is that it should be simple in design and taste. The school, however, was closed by the Nazis in 1933, and the faculty, including Joseph Albers, had to leave. So this is the Bauhaus building that Walter Gropius designed before World War I. All right. With World War II, art comes to a standstill. Many artists served in the war, and art was used for propaganda. When the war was over, the art world again centers in New York, and it would be there for the next 50 years. Important art critics: Harold Rosenberg, Clement Greenberg, all the Bergs. Tremendous influence. Greenberg was advancing the idea of abstraction, that there should be a direct presentation of feeling in the art, and like dramatic color and vivid brushwork. So here we have some abstract expressionists. Art could be free of the limitations of pictorial subject matter. It could be anything. So some of you begin to follow Kandinsky, William de Kooning here, Lee Krasner here, Franz Klein, or could be the other way around, not sure. But the pinnacle of abstract expressionism is with Jackson Pollock. He would just drip paint on a canvas, and he would use a paintbrush like you would see for a house, and also employed action painting. So he would just kind of take the paintbrush and just fling it. So he employed dramatic brush strokes, and almost in a way was violent because he was just flinging the paint onto the canvas. And he would use, paint from just like you would buy at Home Depot, paint buckets. And then we have color field paintings. This is the second form of abstract expressionism. We have broad areas of color and simple geometric shapes. Here's Mark Rothko and Joseph Albers. Remember, he was part of the Bauhaus movement and had to leave Germany. Artists start to return to naturalism. The expressionism had gone way beyond what they had wanted, so then they react and come back. Some wanted to paint actual objects. Jasper Johns is particularly known for this piece called Flags. And the interesting thing is when you see this in person, and the flags seem to jump out at you. So he would paint flags, numbers, maps, and letters. Robert Rauschenberg used cast-off items. That should be another F right there. Monogram, one particular piece that he did, had an actual stuffed goat, like taxidermy, a tire, police barrier, heel of a shoe, and paint. This isn't monogram here, this is something else. But you could see that he's using cast-off items and putting them together. And I do have the piece monogram, I believe, shown later. And then we have use of everyday items influencing pop art. 1960s, people using pop culture items, and artists are violating this unspoken rule of art. Andy Warhol becomes a rock star, and he painted soup cans, Brillo boxes. Brillo is a brand of cleaning product. Images of stars, Marilyn Monroe. And he did factory screen silk, and he's mocking the art world, how it's supposed to be so important. Roy Lichtenstein, he would do comic book type figures, and you would see them, and he had would use these particular dots. Robert Indiana would use stencils originally used for commercial signs and then take them and make them into art. So again, this idea of ready-mades. Minimalists, reducing art to the barest essentials, monochromatic paintings or palettes. Acrylic paints are helping to create hard edges. I think it was Stella, and I don't know, and I'll have to change that so you could see who the people were supposed to be. Well, here, let's just do it this way. Escape. Oh, there we go. Dan Flavin. I don't know. David Smith. Frank Stella. A little better there. Okay. And more pop artists. World aimed at super realism now, being influenced by the camera, photorealism, sharp focus, clear contrast to sfumato. Remember, Da Vinci had created sfumato. Chuck Close wants his paintings to look very much like a photo, and Dwayne Hansen is creating sculptures of very ordinary people. You know, the ugly American tourist. 1970, earthworks and installations. Art is no longer limited to the gallery or museums. Art on a new scale with new venues. So we have Christo and Jean-Claude doing earthworks. They would wrap monuments in fabric, build cloth fences. They surrounded an island in pink fabric, created orange fabric gates. Huge scale. These would take years to complete. Again, taking a long time. Jean-Claude would handle the logistics while Christo would handle the designs. And again, these are done, and this just looks like something simple in a yard. But then over here, so this is Michael Heiser and Robert Smithson creating these huge swirls. Performance art. It's a combination of theater and art. It was transitory in nature. It doesn't last long, so it's done. You do it, it's done. Creating a real event in which the audience can participate. And the problem is it's not fixed or marketable. You can't sell it. And often it was socially conscious. Guerrilla Girls is an example of this. They were all female and anonymous, and they may give speeches or post flyers. Postmodernist art, reintroducing traditional art or exaggerating elements. Philip Johnson was the leading architect of the international style. So we see exaggerated shapes. This is a glass house. Yes, it's a glass house. A house all of glass. Who wants to live in that? Non-Western art or Asian art. Chinese art, we think painted wares, China, and the Great Wall. And the emperors left tombs with great art. Emperor of Qin had the life-size clay soldiers. I'm sure you have seen those. Later dynasties had bronze statues and ceremonial vessels. Buddhism in Tang Dynasty, China's golden age. Great value on ink drawings. And the Communist Revolution, art infused with political ideas, propaganda, but since 1970 has become less political. Indian art, 1,600 different languages and dialects, can you imagine? So there's a variety of religions and cultures. Ruins of early civilizations are still present, and it's reflecting an influence of Hinduism. Buddhas were often influenced by Greek ideas, and their sculptures were often lively and sinuous. You could see long, moving shapes. That's what it means by sinuous. And here's a reproduction of Shiva. Japanese art. It was closed to most of the world, so the art remained consistent, not influenced by outside forces. Buddhism was imported to Japan. Some Japanese artists went to France and brought back ideas. And at the end of the 19th century, they were using linear perspective and colors and the subjects of Impressionism. It was rejected, however, and artists went back to isometric perspective with flat areas of color, and Japanese art known most for printmaking, although they were shortly influenced by the French. African and Oceanic art, cave paintings in Namibia. The Nok civilization had lifelike terracotta structures. Political and religious leaders in present-day Nigeria. They were influenced by the Yoruba and the Benin Kingdom. It was a royal court and had bronze heads for altars. They were representing the power of the Oba, or the king. Many objects, however, were destroyed by the Britons in a raid in 1897, and the objects that now represent Africa are in museums outside of Africa because they were taken away. So African art was also destroyed by traders and settlers. They perceived their art as pagan and should be destroyed. Other objects were perishable. So more studies are now being done on African art. And there's a challenge of this idea that art is for art's sake, that it should only be for art. But on this other side, some believe that everyday items can be art, baskets or ceramics or textiles. The Dan and Bois tribes were known for their masks, and the masks were not meant to be seen in isolation, not just in a museum. They were meant to be part of a performance. Oceania, these are the islands that constitute Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia, used mainly perishables. Of course, it was a hostile climate to the arts, so many no longer exist. Polynesia, tattooing showed social status, but of course, when a person died, the artwork went with them. Asmat cultural group of Melanesia, headhunting, and ornate carved wooden shields and carved masks. The Maori of New Zealand are now trying to preserve their culture. Islam, it emerged with the Prophet Muhammad, and their holy book is the Quran. Their art is beautifully reproduced copies of the Quran or containers holding the Quran. Following the religic, Islamic art is non-figurative. You're not supposed to paint images of people, and you can never ever do a drawing or some kind of reproduction of Muhammad. That's not allowed. So their art is abstract or calligraphic. Sacred architecture, Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Prayer is very important to Muslims. Pray 5 times a day, I believe. Could be that wrong. And always pointing towards Mecca. And mosque architecture. In the Americas, simple craftsmen, not considered a work of art then, but they're now receiving more attention. In the Americas, there were the Olmec, Toltec, Mayan, Aztec, Inca, and they had the pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun. They're the Mayan ruins. They had statues in clay and stone. They had textiles and jewelry. North America, most objects didn't survive. Most objects that we have now are from just the last 2,000 years, even though the civilizations dated from 12,000 years ago. Native Americans had great architectural skills with Pueblo buildings. And, that's all I have for this. Okay. So there will now be moving on to elements of art. So again, make sure you read or listen, and memorize. And we're done.